Welcome to another edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is Janice Perkins. I'll tell you all about Janice in just a moment. Grace Under Pressure is the show that deals with what's too often dismissed as the soft stuff, the caring, the commitment, the compassion we exert toward others. And when you do it as a leader, which you will discover that Janice very much is, you do it to bring people together for common cause. Welcome, Janice Perkins.
Hi, John. It's so good to be here and great to see you.
Great. So you are a two-time guest, but I want to tell you're coming from a little different perspective today. So I want to tell people all about you. You run a firm called Capacity Communications, which you created to help individuals achieve their individual growth and become more profitable as well as more productive. And the side note, you have been the vice president for business development for Methods, where you and I originally connected. So you are a subject matter expert, and you're a member of ACEC, Association of Corporate Executive Coaches, and you are a frequent volunteer everywhere in your community, which is Wichita, Kansas. And you're a noted speaker and coach, and you're going to tell us about how we connect more effectively. So welcome, Janice.
Thank you. We had a great time when you came to Wichita, John. It was awesome.
Well, I got to be honest with you, Janice, I'm a little bit intimidated because when I was in Wichita with Methods, which was a video production training house, the best in the business as far as I'm concerned, you interviewed me. And so you are really, really good at it. So now the tables are turned. So I got to be on my toes.
Thank you.
Janice, top of mind topic with so many folks is the Great Resignation. I like to look at it perhaps as great liberation of employees. What's your perspective, Janice?
I really love that phrase, John, because I do believe it revealed a lot of things. This great resignation has shown it's taken the power away from corporations and put it in the hands of the employees, which has long been needed to drive better culture and better psychological and emotional environments that employees can have more of a voice in. So I believe there's a lot of things that have been exposed, and culture being primarily one of those, and that it's a reason people choose to stay or not stay in an organization. We all have bad work stories through our history, and this gives people the right to say, no, I'm in demand and I can go somewhere where I am valued and I have a better voice, and the culture is more positive and enriching and encouraging.
I love that. And you said an operative word, I feel valued. As you know, my work in purpose is about creating the vision and mission, but it's our values, whereas how we feel, how we belong. So I'm experimenting with the concept of organizations as community. And I know you are deeply connected to community in your community with your church and all the activities that you do. So do you see a parallel? Is it possible, do you think, for a workplace to become a center of community?
I believe that very strongly, actually. And you and I are very aligned on what we believe values and character development is in a leader, an individual, and in a workplace, because love is a huge part of that. If we want to have mutual respect and we want to have reciprocity, then we have to be able to find common ground. And that includes acceptance and trust. And those things they come out of love. And those things around unity, also same place. And the ultimate would be altruism. And it excited me to hear you talk about community in the sense that long-term, some of the things that I talk about and train come from Dr. Kohlberg's work in ethics. I call it the maturity scale, and I added to it, as well as spiral dynamics. You know, the epitome of community is altruism, and not just giving of what I have for the people who can benefit from it, or giving what I have for people I love, but giving what I have for complete strangers, giving what I have for people who need it, who I don't know, who it doesn't benefit me and I don't get credit for it. That's
Well, I think we call
community.
that's grace.
That is
So,
exactly right.
but and I'm glad you mentioned it, because what you just described is exactly what one of the inspirations that I have found, and that's Father Greg Boyle, who's a Jesuit priest in East Los Angeles, who runs Homeboy Industries, the largest gang intervention program in the U.S. or in the country, in the world. Let's put it this way. And so he talks about the connectedness that we feel. The radical kinship is a subtitle of one of his books, and that's what it is. It's that connectedness. And it's so often in our culture we can say, well, Janice, I could connect with, but are you deserving of it? Well, how pompous is that? But I think sometimes we feel that. Do you sense that? So
it's definitely one of the things that I actually train in organizations, because we can't love and give of ourselves if we don't first have faith in who we are and faith in other people. And that then leads to acceptance. So if I am carrying around negative weight about myself, I can't stand truly in my gifts and talents and accept who I am, then I can't start to build bridges to other people. So I start internally, then I have to have faith and believe in other people. I don't have to have them be my BFF. I don't have to hug them. I don't have to bring them home. But I have to believe in who they are, and that there's goodness and gifts and talents, and that we can find common ground and work together. Those two steps then lead to acceptance, because then I can truly accept that someone's different, but they have something to offer of value. And then all of a sudden I start to build community.
Great. You are an executive coach. And so if I come to you and I say, Janice, everything you're saying is good, I'd like to do that, but I have, your term was, I just don't know how to reach out. And maybe I've had some experiences in my life which have harmed me. And so I'm fearful and unsure. What advice, or what would you tell me to do?
Well, that's a step of courage, right? It's about being brave. And not being afraid it's not an act of vulnerability or neediness, that it calls for. It calls for an act of courage. To ask for help is a big deal. And our culture frowns on asking for help and admitting our failures out loud. And so it just takes an act of bravery to look for a place where I can unload and reload inside. It's all about emptying the toxicity and then refilling with positivity and encouragement. And a lot of times we get so busy and our focus shifts from looking long to looking short, and we just do what the calendar requires. We do what life requires. We do what the job requires. And we're doing it out of an empty tank. So the first step is just realizing that I don't awake every day with the knowledge, skills, and wisdom to be able to do what's handed to me,
Right. Something that I toss about, and I know our colleagues, Adrian Gostick and Chester Elton, dealt with it in their book, Lead with Gratitude. Gratitude is an outward expression. I'm grateful for what you have done to me, but I think we also need self-gratitude, which comes from, I'd like to help. Simply, I don't have the funds to stroke a check. I can't spend 10 hours a week doing X, but I can be there and be grateful for what you can offer. Do you come across that, Janice? So
I do. And I find that when it comes to, that's a part of self-care is, it's intellectual, it's spiritual, it's emotional, it's physical. We have multiple facets of who we are that we have to bring into alignment and pour back into ourselves so that we can take from it. And part of that for me, I talk about the well of hope. Hope has to be a big tank that we fill inside ourselves so that we can be grateful internally as well as externally. And that can help build our well of hope over time, giving things away, being grateful, resonating with other people who have more optimism. There are a variety of things that can fill that well of hope, but it certainly has to do with our internal view of ourselves and being, grateful for the things that we can accomplish.
Great. And you touched on a topic I think is too often dismissed, and that's the idea of self-care. But, as we're in this, in our second year of the closing our second year of the pandemic, and fingers crossed, we're the worst is behind us, we've had this time to reflect. And people are more amenable to this concept of self-care. So, but part of that is vulnerability. And once upon a time, like 2 weeks ago, vulnerability would be viewed as weakness. I no longer think that's true. Does that resonate with you, Janice?
I do, and I think that empathy falls into that as well. There's gaining more traction and becoming a contemporary concept that's necessary, because I agree with you. I hope we're on the heels of the pandemic, but guess what? Another dark day will come. Seasons change. They go up and down. There are other winters that each of us will encounter, maybe not globally, but individually. And what we learned is that we can't draw from other people when everyone's empty. Which is what sometimes happens when we have personal experiences that are difficult. We have support around us, but when the whole globe is overwhelmed and uncertain, we realize that our only tank we can draw from is in here. And so, and we realize that we hadn't been pouring into ourselves for a long time. And that's part of building a well of hope. It's part of establishing joy and an abiding love for ourselves and other people, because those are the tanks that we draw from. I mean, you can't take risks, live in deep anxiety and fear, and have courage to innovate in tough times if you don't have that. That's where the hard stuff comes from.
Right. And, you talked about stuff, and we're all going to have challenges and ups and downs, and hopefully it's not global, but we're going to need this reservoir of strength. But the other thing about it is hope. And I know that's a topic that you explore. What does hope mean to you, Janice?
What it means to me, it's that well of hope. I have always been somewhat of an optimistic person, and tomorrow can be a better day. But I, through a hardship of my own 10 years ago, went through a very large health crisis in which both my kids had been ill for a while. I became ill. We developed chronic illnesses from mold in our home and a variety of other things. And it was a very hard road out, a very hard and difficult road. And when you're faced with something that's not just situationally short term, it changes your view of resilience and hope, because I don't just need to be optimistic for a couple weeks or a couple months. I need to have something that I am anchored to that's stronger than that can't be shaken. And for me, part of that is faith, as well as my own internal view of how I apply that. And what do I say to myself? Like, what's the story I say to myself about faith? Is it something I really believe in, or what can I hold fast to?
Great.
And so that enabled me to see that there were gaps in my own hope tank and places where I needed to fill the holes, so to speak, so that there was enough to draw from all the time for years. And because it was a financial hardship, it was a physical hardship, it was an emotional and spiritual hardship. Parenting was difficult. There were lots of layers to it. And so hope became a steadfast anchor that I held on to in a very long storm. And what it made me realize, again, is all the hard stuff comes from there. When that tank is full, then I'm able to love people who are hard to love. I'm able to forgive people when it's difficult. I'm able to let go of things that are hard to resist holding on to. So all the hard stuff can come when I am anchored to something as secure as hope.
Great. So how does one, you use the term tank a few times, or reservoir, which is a good word. How do you replenish it?
So there's a variety of things, and I go through a whole program when I train this. But one of the things is what you mentioned earlier that Adrian and Chester talk about. Gratitude is a practice. There are daily practices, whether it's affirmations or a gratitude journal or things that are very helpful in that. It changes the mindset. It's the people that we're around in our support group. We resonate the energy of the people we surround ourselves with. What we put in, we put out. And that includes the people we energetically resonate with. The other things I talk about include plan B. A lot of times we don't release our plan B. We have to really lean into the thing that we look forward to. We have to have a true expectation of something better to come, and we have to believe in it. And believing in it means I have to let go of the security of plan B, C, and D sometimes. So there's a whole kind of coursework that I walk through, but it involves a lot of those things. And over a period of time, that tank then is full and is able to stay full even when I have to draw from it.
And then it all sounds very logical to me and all that, but we know that life is not logical. The human condition, our emotions are not always that way. So we are on our path, okay, that we're going to have setbacks. So, so when someone is going through the challenges that you described, that you personalize, where does one find that hope, or how does one, quote, get back on track? Any suggestions for that, Janice? So
yes, I think that our jobs are to give hope away. First of all, there's always someone in need of it. And in fact, that is one of the ways you also build more hope, is by giving more away. So it is, since my dark pit, it has been my job to make sure that I always give away hope as often as possible. And that includes something that Howard Prager would say, as small as a smile that makes someone's day, or kindness in small measures. Those things can really help give people hope. It's also about giving myself grace, John, because we all in dark times have a pity party for a second. Let's be honest. It's not about perfection. Hope doesn't mean that I never am sad. And hope doesn't mean that I'm never disappointed or frustrated or angry, or just get overwhelmed some days. I don't want people to think that I smile all the time. Sometimes,
and you have a lovely smile, and viewers are calling in and saying, boy, Janice really projects that smile, which is true, because I, worked with you on camera as in real life too. So yes. So I'm glad you talked about that, because we are not perfect creatures and we are human. That's what makes us who we are. And so it's okay to be down on, if I hear you correctly, to be down on yourself, or when you misstep, something I'm unfamiliar with completely, Janice, we don't get overly down on ourselves, and we resolve to do better the next time. Is that something that you advise?
Yes, it's one of the things that I give people permission all the time, that hopefulness does not mean that other emotions don't exist and that we don't process them. Yeah. I think that actually mourning loss and processing grief or anger are incredible parts of remaining hopeful, because it's not denying truth. We can't live in a pool of denial and actually be hopeful. You can actually process truth and still be anchored to hope at the same time.
Right. I'm glad you touched on that, and I can sense in the subtext of hope is sense of optimism. And there's a saying that we use, that leaders must be those who look at the glass as half full versus half empty. And I like to say that leaders are not Pollyanna, but they're, as you just said, grounded in reality. One can be optimistic and still face the truth, correct? So
that's exactly right. I'm a realist before I'm an optimist, actually, because without wrestling truth, you can't actually expect good things to come, because it's not realistic, right? I don't have a pie in the sky dream, although I've shimmied down on a lot of thin branches and taken risks and had big, hairy, audacious goals in my life. I'm a realist, and things that can actually take place, and a mountain I can actually climb, even if it's hard, comes before I'm optimistic, for sure.
Well, there's, something that's, people touching a little bit on goal setting, but I can see this in times of adversity. And we might think, well, I want this all to go away tomorrow, which of course we do. But do you advise people to take a small step? In other words, before you go to Everest, climb a hill. So
absolutely. It needs to be a big mountain to you that day, not someone else's mountain. Mm-hmm. And everybody's mountain is a different size. And what I can climb each day for me is a different size, and a lot of times, in faith, even, we're told that we're not given more than we can handle. And that's a myth. And it's a lie. We're given more than we can handle all the time, but it's still the mountain I was handled. And I have tools that are different from yours to climb it. I still wouldn't want to trade mountains with other people. Right. So that's part of the perspective.
And that's important, and that gets back to your sense of realism. So you're anchored in the here and now, but also there's that projection forward, which is you talked about goals that you have and how I can get them. So if someone's working toward a goal and it's harder than they anticipate, what advice might you have?
So there's a couple different things. One of my favorite authors is Mark Batterson, and he has a phrase called letting go of unborn yesterdays. Let me say it right. No, letting go of dead yesterdays and unborn tomorrows. And a lot of times when we're having difficulty with a task or something in front of us, we're dragging anchors or we're driving toward the wrong thing. And we have to patch that up or drop those anchors, plug the leaks in the boat, so to speak, before we can really move at the speed we need to. And all of us drag around dead weight, whether it's internal or external. We pick up toxicity along our journeys, and which I always tell people, which is why every 3 to 5 years you should move houses, right? Because you think, how did I pick up all this stuff? That's what we do in our emotional selves too. We pick up stuff and we don't realize it because it happens in small measures. So it's a great way to step back, take emotional stock of what's going on along your goal journey. What's the trajectory? What's keeping me from my best self? Because it's probably something in here or emotionally out here that is preventing that.
Right. So what are the kind of the little things I love the analogy of moving houses and that I'm going to say emotional baggage. So what are the kind of baggage we carry that we don't really realize? Do you come across that or as an example of?
I do actually. I have part of my training. I work with people about I talk about the assumption suitcases. So we build assumptions about other people. It's part of losing faith in other people and why we don't have great acceptance or love for a colleague at work is that every time I walk into a meeting, I roll my eyes and think Susie's going to ask me about my weekend again. Or Bob's going to just stick to the agenda, and I have these assumptions and I put them in my suitcase and I drag them in every time I meet with Bob and Susie. And they have assumptions about my eye rolling. And before you know it, we have devalued that interaction because we have way too much baggage between us. And it's not, a relational emotional baggage like we consider in something in our personal life, but it absolutely devalues our professional experience and the bridge and the success that we can build between us. And I have to be conscious of that because my mind is built to make presumptions.
Oh, right. So, the way that we cut through that is, of course, of treating people with respect, giving people the benefit of the doubt. Very, very easy to say. And because you perfectly encapsulated what happens in long-term relationships or in the sense of work relationships. I know Susie's going to do this. I know Bob's going to do this. So, it's tiresome. So how do we cut through that? How do we give them a second chance, or is it ourselves we give a second chance? So
it's definitely some of both. I think part of it's reframing, John, for sure. When we give someone the benefit of the doubt, like you said, it's really easy to say, well, I know John and I are different people, but I don't accept him being different than me. Right? It's that thing we do. Well, I know everybody's not built like me, but my way seems better right now. So why can't Bob and Susie just come to the meeting and do what I want? That's not actually, that's retraining here. I need to retrain myself. What's the story I'm telling myself about Bob and Susie? That they got up today to make my life harder? No.
Well, maybe they did actually, but I understand. Yeah.
But yeah, it's assuming the best in people and that they have something to offer and that we can find reciprocity. We can find common ground to stand on where, there is truth in history. Maybe Bob's always late to the meeting. It doesn't matter. It's not about me. Okay. Maybe I set the meeting time 15 minutes earlier to trick Bob. I don't know what I do. But the point is we can find common ground without having to deal with our differences, but find our sameness.
I like it. So do you advocate having a frank conversation with a Bob and a Susie, or just do it on your own? What's your perspective on that, Janice? So.
Part of that depends on maturity. The biggest amount of work comes from me. When we build bridges of communication and mutual respect with people, 100% of the building of the bridge comes from me. So if I start from that perspective, that I do the emotional work to build the bridge, then I can invite someone into that same level of maturity and see if they can meet me there. If they
Right.
can't, that's fine. But I have to accept that and then be able to move forward without resentment or bitterness or anything, because we all have families of origin and company culture and experiences that are vastly different than our own. And we have no idea what the data points are behind the scenes.
Okay. As you were talking about this, I'm almost seeing that this is the origin, or the perhaps one of the reasons for the name of your organization, Capacity Communications. What does that mean to you? So.
It is the origin. It means that I watched myself and other people for years get locked in what I would call our finite capacity. So I have 8 hours in a day. I have only 24 hours in a day, because I'm also, a parent, and I have 2 hands and a limited number of resources. And when we get overwhelmed, when we get into stress and have anxiety and uncertainty, it's because we're trapped in that finite capacity that we have. But what I love doing is opening up that heart work and bringing the emotional self into the equation and stabilizing that mental, emotional, and spiritual alignment, so that we can have more unlimited capacity of growth. If we stand on our finite resources, we are limited, but we can expand who we are in character development and heart work, and be able to take on more, handle more, and get through obstacles easier.
Great. Since you're not a cardiologist, what does heart work mean? So,
I'm going to tell you a story. Thank you for asking that question, because it comes, the phrase, it comes from a book called The Laws of Human Nature. And he tells a story about the ancient Greeks and how they viewed the irrational and the rational self. And they compared it to a horse and a rider. And the horse is our irrational self, our emotional self. And the rider is our rational self. And what I realized when he started painting this picture of the ancient Greeks, that a horse on its own would wander. And a rider on its own doesn't get very far. But as a rider, when we can harness the power of our emotions, then we can go farther and we can travel farther, and we're more effective. And so when we enable ourselves to do that heart work in our character and the emotional self of who we are, we can multiply ourselves. I mean, think of what the power of a horse has compared to me. 20 times my ability to run or have power or pull. If you think about that, I think about how many times in my life I was not harnessing my emotional self, and I just got off in the horse in my rational self and tried to walk, denying myself that ability to expand who I am, because I was trying to be so rational and logical. And I think that's what we do as leaders. We stand in the black and white of logic a lot of times and data, and we forget that we have the power to expand who we are right here in our hearts.
Right. Well, I like that, and heart work, which I think, if I understand it, it's our ability to care for others, compassion, empathy, those times, but also our own resilience, our own strength, as you talked about, our own capacity, leading to your firm, capacity to communicate, capacity to connect. All of that's wound up together. Janice, we are racing through this episode, so I ask every guest, as you know, a story about grace. Is there something you wish to share with us? So,
I would love to. I intimated earlier, through my chronic illness about 10 years ago, there was also something right before that, a few years, that I lost my job. I was in New York on 9/11, and I lost my job. And it was one of the first big career loss jobs at that point in my life. And I lost my identity for a little while, because I was wrapped up in what I did, not who I was.
mm-hmm.
And so I had to give myself a lot of grace in that moment. And I had to learn a lot more about myself, because I was frustrated with my frustration and my lack of identity. And I just realized that I hadn't really been modeled a lot of learning who I am and my gifts and talents versus what I do and that identity. So that is a huge grace story for me, on top of the resilience and grace I had to learn through the chronic illness and caring for my kids. And I now parent my parents. So I swim in grace often, and give myself grace, because it is just difficult. It's a difficult road. So
Well, good. I'm so glad you talked about grace toward oneself. That is part of self-care and a great thing. But we need to show grace to ourselves before we can do it to others. Would you agree? So,
Absolutely. I don't have the ability to be loving to hard people or forgiving in difficulty if I can't first give grace here. I mean, we are our own worst critic, and our self-limiting behavior is part of what can limit our capacity too. So it comes here, and then I can give it away.
great. Janice, you've been a wonderful guest. How can people find you? So,
My website is ihavecapacity.com. The email is Janice at ihavecapacity.com. Janice Perkins on LinkedIn and all social media.
great. We will put that in the notes. So, Janice, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show. I know you're an extremely busy person, but thanks for spending some time with us today.
It was great to see you, John, and great to spend time with you.